Every story you'll hear today started with something ordinary, a knock on the door. But what was behind that door was anything but ordinary.
I was living alone in a small rental house just outside town when this happened. It was a one-story place at the end of a short dead-end road. There were only 5 houses on the street, and at night it was usually quiet. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, so most days I didn't leave unless I had to get groceries. I didn't get visitors often. My friends usually texted before coming over. That's why the first knock stood out. It was around 8:45 at night on a Thursday. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard 4 firm knocks on the front door. I muted the TV and waited, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then there were 2 more knocks. I got up and walked to the door. There's a small peephole in the center of it. When I looked through, I saw a man standing on my porch holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He looked normal, maybe mid-30s. I opened the door, but kept the chain on. He immediately said that he had a delivery that required a signature. He read a name off a small handheld device. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. I told him he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at the device, then back at me. He read the address out loud. It was my exact address. I told him no one by that name lived here. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he said he must have been given the wrong information and would take it back to the truck. I watched him walk back down my driveway. I expected to see a delivery van or at least a car parked somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. He walked past my mailbox and turned the corner at the end of the street. I didn't see where he went. I shut the door and locked it. I told myself it was just a small company delivery, or maybe a contractor driver without a marked vehicle. The next night, at almost the exact same time, there were 3 knocks again. This time, I didn't open the door right away. I went to the peephole first. It was the same man, with the same jacket and box. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it and told him he already came by and that no one with that name lived here. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he just needed a signature and that the system showed the package had to be delivered tonight. I told him I wasn't signing for someone I didn't know. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Okay," and stepped back from the door. I stayed at the peephole. Instead of walking away right away, he stood at the edge of the porch looking at the house. He slowly turned his head toward my front windows, then toward the side of the house, then back at the door. After about 15 seconds, he finally walked down the driveway. Again, I saw no vehicle. That's when it started to feel wrong. On the 3rd night, there was no knock. I actually felt relieved. I thought maybe he figured out the mistake. I even joked to myself about how weird it would have been if he showed up again. On the 4th night, I was in the kitchen washing dishes around 9 p.m. when I heard 4 knocks. It wasn't on the front door. It was on the side of the house near the dining room window. I slowly walked into the dining room and looked toward the window, but no one was there. Then there were 4 more knocks at the front door. I went to the peephole, and it was him again, but this time he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I didn't say anything, and he knocked again. Then he stepped back and looked directly at the peephole. I stepped away from the door so he couldn't see movement, and I didn't make a sound. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before checking the windows. I walked around the house with the lights off and looked through the blinds. I saw him standing across the street near the tree line. He was just standing there, facing my house. After maybe a minute, he walked off into the darkness. I relocked every window and door again, even though they were already locked. The next day, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained what had been happening. The officer I spoke to said it sounded like someone trying to verify occupancy. He said sometimes burglars will knock to see if someone answers before trying to break in later. He told me to install cameras if I could and to call 911 if the man came back. That night, I left all the lights off in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom. Around 8:45, right on time, there were 4 knocks. I didn't respond at all. After a few seconds, 4 more. Then silence. I waited about a minute. Then I heard something else, a soft thud against the back of my house, and then another. I realized it sounded like someone testing the back door. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the hallway. I could hear the back doorknob turning slowly, and then stopping, and then turning again. I called 911 like I was instructed and whispered that someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the knocking started again at the front door. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The back doorknob kept turning. There was more than one person. Then I heard the sound of something metal scraping lightly against the door frame. After about 30 seconds, everything stopped. Even as it was totally silent, though, I stayed on the phone until the police arrived. When they searched the outside of the house, they found fresh pry marks on the back door near the handle. The officer told me if I hadn't been home, the door likely would have been forced open. They drove around but didn't find anyone suspicious. The next night, I stayed at my brother's apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone on social media or anything that I wasn't home. I just left. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down. She said there was someone standing on my porch, knocking repeatedly. She said he had been there for at least 5 minutes. She asked if I was home. I told her no and asked if he had a vehicle. She said she didn't see one. I told her to call the police. Officers arrived and questioned him. Later that night, an officer called me and said the man claimed he was trying to deliver a package, but he misplaced it. He had no company ID and no marked vehicle. They warned him to stay away from the property. 2 days later, police arrested him in a nearby neighborhood after he was caught attempting to break into a house where the owner was out of town. In his car, they found multiple empty cardboard boxes and a small handheld scanner that wasn't connected to any real delivery company. During questioning, he admitted he would knock with a fake package first. If someone answered, he would leave and mark the house as occupied. If no one answered after multiple attempts, he would come back later and force entry. He told detectives that sometimes he would knock several nights in a row to see if the pattern changed. If lights were on one night and off the next, he assumed the house was empty. Hearing that made me realize how close I was to not being home that first week. If I had ignored the door on one of those early nights, he probably would have come back later expecting no one inside. I moved out of that house 3 months later when my lease ended. I still don't answer the door at night unless I know exactly who's coming over. If someone knocks unexpectedly, I stay quiet and check cameras first. And if anyone ever shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I don't even go near the door anymore. This story starts in the lead up to Christmas. To set the scene, I live near Glasgow in Scotland. I stay with my parents, siblings, cats, and dogs. We're a close-knit family and often spend nights together in the living room, watching TV, playing games, and catching up on our lives. At the time of this story, I was 16, turning 17. I was in high school, but getting closer to leaving and starting my education outside of it. In the days leading up to Christmas, during one of those late nights together, we were watching A Christmas Carol. We often have movie nights around Christmas, and it's one of my favorite things about that time of year. During the movie, we heard a knock at the door. This wasn't unusual, so we didn't think much of it. My mom got up to answer it, but nobody was there. The street was empty. Our garden wrapped from the front of the house around to the back, so she checked along the side of the house too, but nobody was there either. She came back inside and we resumed the movie. A few days later, I was sitting at the living room table doing exam work when I heard another knock. I paused my work and went to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. We assumed it was probably neighborhood kids playing a prank. Where I'm from, kids sometimes get bored and cause trouble instead of finding something better to do. In Scotland, there's a game called Chappie, where kids knock on someone's door and run away laughing. It's stupid, but as a kid, the adrenaline rush of someone opening the door to nobody there can be weirdly fun. We have a family group chat where we keep each other updated on things, and throughout that week, several family members mentioned experiencing the same thing. The one that stood out the most was something my dad experienced. At the time, my dad usually stayed up later than everyone else, either playing Xbox or watching shows once the house was quiet. One night, around 11:30, when the street was silent and all the kids would have been inside, he heard a very quiet knock. He was confused because of the
time. He checked through the peephole before opening the door, but he saw nobody. He slowly unlocked and opened the door to look outside. Again, nobody was there, just a quiet, empty street. He locked the door and came upstairs to ask if anyone had heard it, but because the knock was so quiet, nobody else had. This started to unsettle us because it had been happening repeatedly. Nobody had ever seen or heard anyone outside except for the knocking itself. Usually when kids do this, you hear them laughing or running away. This felt different. Christmas Day is when everything escalated. We spent the day with family opening presents, sharing gifts, watching movies, playing games, and eating way too much food. It was a great day. Later that night, I felt sick from eating so much, which I always do at Christmas, so I went upstairs to lie down. I ended up dozing off and woke up hours later. When I checked my phone, it said 2:01 a.m. Everyone else was in bed and the house was completely silent. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep because once I woke up, it's hard for me to sleep again no matter what time it is. I stayed on my phone in the dark, scrolling social media instead of turning the TV on, watching Christmas present haul videos and messaging friends who are still awake. It's normal during Christmas break when there's no school or responsibilities and you try to enjoy the freedom before going back to exams and routines. After a while, I heard a faint knock. I wasn't sure if it came from my door, my window, or if I imagined it. I sat up straight in bed, staring into the dark room with my heart racing. I didn't want to move. I knew nobody should be outside at that time on Christmas night. I didn't know if the past few weeks were just getting into my head or if someone was actually inside the house. My room is on the second floor, so someone being at my window would be very unlikely. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to open my bedroom door. As I did, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My brain immediately assumed it was my dad coming to bed after staying up late like he usually did. I stepped into view of the staircase to tell him I was still awake and heard the knocking again. That's when I realized it wasn't my dad. It was a man I'd never seen. I immediately felt sick when I saw him. I wondered if this was the person behind all the knocking. He was already inside the house. He was staggering as he climbed the stairs and looked heavily intoxicated. I slowly backed into my room, luckily without him seeing me, and I quietly shut my door. I could hear him walking around and opening doors, going into each room one by one. I remember thinking it was only a matter of time before he reached mine. I completely froze and didn't know what to do. It felt like all my common sense disappeared. Eventually, I opened my door slightly and saw him coming out of my younger sister's room. That's when my brain finally kicked back into action. I ran to my parents' room and told them there was a man inside the house. My mom woke up instantly while my dad was still groggy. We went downstairs together and found the man passed out on the couch with my dad's beers opened and scattered around him. My mom shouted at him to get out. He woke slightly and angrily insisted the house belonged to him. We tried to get him up, but he was completely dead weight. My mom slapped him trying to wake him, but he barely reacted. A few minutes later, my dad came fully downstairs, saw what was happening, and immediately took control of the situation. He shouted at the man that this was not his house and threatened him to leave. The man refused. Eventually, my dad had to physically lift him off the couch and drag him out the side door. He forced him outside and warned him not to come back before shutting the door. We thought it was finally over, but seconds later, glass suddenly shattered toward us. The man had punched through the window, sending broken glass inside. He pushed his face inside the broken glass like something out of The Shining. While my dad went to call the police, the man started shouting aggressive threats, saying he now owned the house, that he knew what we looked like, and that he would return. Needless to say, we were all in shock. It was hard to believe someone would do something like this on Christmas night. Eventually, he left and the police arrived. They took statements from all of us. Mine was the longest since I had seen him first. Not long after, the police left. Luckily, because it was the winter, it had snowed that night, which is actually rare where we live, since we usually just get slush. There was a clear trail of blood leading down the street. Police followed it to a nearby playground where they found the man lying on the ground with blood and glass in his hands. They arrested him after and later confirmed they believed he was the intruder. Our window was replaced the next morning. We told our siblings what had happened. Surprisingly, they slept through the whole thing, probably knocked out from all the Christmas food. Later, I got a restraining order against the man because of my age and the threats he made. He was fined for the damage and given community service instead of jail time. When police questioned him about the weeks of knocking at our door before
The incident, he claimed he knew nothing about that and denied ever doing it. It turned out he actually lived in our house years before we moved in. He claimed there was no bad intention and said he had simply drank too much while out with friends and accidentally went into the wrong house. Thankfully, nobody in our family was seriously hurt. The only injury was my mom bruising her wrist from slapping him while wearing bracelets. Apparently, that hurts you more than the person you hit. To this day, we still have no explanation for the knocking that happened before that night. Even now, sometimes I feel like I hear a knock at night. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe it isn't. I guess I'll never know if it was him or someone else out there watching. This happened around 2010 when I was about 6 years old. My family and I were living in a small neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was my older brother, sister, my mom, and I, as my dad was deployed at the time. I was really close with my dad and always took it hard when he was away. Late one night, I sat on the porch with my mom while she smoked a cigarette and we watched the rain. While we were sitting there, cold but enjoying the rain in each other's company, we noticed a man walking in the middle of the road. He was wearing one of those oversized yellow rain jackets. It immediately caught both of our attention because it was pouring rain really late and there was no one else usually out at that hour. We sat there watching him as he began walking slightly toward our driveway. My mom stood up, grabbed my hand, put her cigarette out, and we watched as the man began walking slightly toward our driveway. My mom turned to take us inside, and the man began yelling at us. I don't remember what he said, but I remember being so terrified as my mom rushed me inside. As soon as we got inside, my mom locked the door and turned off all the lights. At that point, I was terrified, and of course, being a kid, I started crying. My mom rushed my siblings and I, shushing us, and we all went and laid in my parents' king-sized bed together, as we were all a bit worried, but nothing else happened. There was no more yelling or noise or anything, so we all drifted to sleep. That night, I had a terrible nightmare I can still picture to this day. It was of a man in a big yellow rain jacket peering through our window. I woke up terrified and crying, literally shaking my sister awake just so I could tell her I was scared. I have no idea how much time passed. My sister got out of bed and walked me to the bathroom that was attached to the bedroom. She shut the door and spoke with me while I cried, trying not to wake my mom or brother. But while we were in there, we suddenly heard banging, loud banging on the front door. My sister burst out of the bathroom and started shaking my mom awake without saying anything, and naturally, my brother woke up from the sound too. I sat terrified in the bathroom while my mom motioned for my siblings to join me in there. We watched her walk out of the room toward the front door. My siblings and I were all crying, scared out of our minds, as this man was still repeatedly banging on the door. My mom must have been trying to find her old BlackBerry phone, but seemingly failed, because when she came back, she didn't have it. That meant none of us could call the police, since this was the only phone in the house. We sat there in silence, listening to the man who was now screaming and yelling for us to let him in, while still banging loudly on the door. It was honestly a really hopeless and fearful night. It was just the five of us, with no phone to call the police, and my dad, who was normally our protector, was gone. We sat there on the floor, huddled together, freaking out and praying our neighbors would call the police, but nothing happened. Eventually, the man left, but no police ever came. What was strange is that it was a small neighborhood where everyone lived close together, and our house specifically was a duplex. So how not a single neighbor heard this and called the police is beyond me. Eventually, we went to sleep and everything was okay for a while, but not even a few weeks later, still just the five of us at my home, my family woke up to my front door wide open, along with a window open and a huge hole cut into the window screen. My mom immediately called the police. There were lots of random items missing, including my piggy bank, filled with all my holiday savings, along with random items around the house. But the most disturbing thing missing was a giant vase filled with cash and coins that my family had been saving for months. The sickening part was that it was on my nightstand right next to my bed where we were all sleeping. This was a long time ago, and sadly my mom has since passed, and my dad wasn't there when it happened, so I'm not really sure what other details I might have missed. I do know that the intruder was never caught. I also don't know if the same man who was harassing us that night was the same person who broke into our house weeks later.
It could be connected or it could not be. I do know that none of us were harmed, which makes me feel like maybe it wasn't the same person, because that man seemed really aggressive for someone who just wanted money. But on the other hand, I later found what looked like the same giant vase sitting on the porch of a neighbor who was a man that lived alone and that we never really saw. So honestly, who knows? This happened to me almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, while I was in Idaho serving a full-time mission. The town that me and my companion, who I'll refer to as Spencer, were assigned to was quite small, so there wasn't always a lot for us to do. And on top of this, at the time, I was going through a rough patch, things like self-esteem issues and having trouble sleeping. So as a result, we found it difficult to stay out all day doing work. One other thing about where we were assigned was that we were living in an actual house, albeit a tiny one. Usually we only ever get apartments, but I guess for this area, a house was the only option, probably because there were no apartments anywhere nearby. The layout of the house was fairly simple. As you walked through the front door, you entered the main room where our desks were, and immediately to your right was our bedroom. If you kept walking straight, you would walk through a large open doorway that led right into the kitchen. From there, to your right was the bathroom, and to your left was the laundry room. and that was it, besides one storage closet in the kitchen as well. One other detail was that although the house technically stood on its own lot, the landlord's house was right next door, and anytime we had problems with something, we could just walk over or call him. On this particular night, I was sitting in the living room at my desk on my phone, with my chair turned to face the kitchen, and Spencer was sitting in the bedroom on his phone. It had gotten dark outside a couple of hours earlier, so we returned home and were just relaxing before we went to bed. In the middle of whatever I was doing, I heard a single knock come from the window above the sink, and because of the layout of the house where this window was, you could basically see the whole living area where I was sitting. I looked up at the window for a few seconds, but only saw darkness. I went back to what I was doing and began to think that it must have just been a branch or something. There were large trees behind the house, but the more I thought about it, the more unlikely it seemed. None of the trees were close enough to the house to brush the window that way, and it wouldn't have made a knock sound like the one I heard. In the middle of having this thought, I heard another knock around the corner at the window in the laundry room. The full weight of what was happening was finally coming into focus, but my mind was still looking for an explanation that didn't conclude that someone was outside, circling the house, stalking my companion and I. I started to tell Spencer what I had heard from the living room, but as I was, another knock came from the window in the living room, the one right next to me. I didn't see who it was on the other side, and I didn't want to. I jumped up and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I asked Spencer if he heard it too, and he said yes. We started debating what to do. All we had for weapons were a couple of knives, and we didn't know how many people were actually out there or if they were armed, so going to confront them on our own was out of the question. During our discussion, the knocking sound moved from the window in the living room to the front door itself, and we were getting more and more freaked out. We briefly debated calling the police, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and they would take them forever to get out there to help us. Then Spencer remembered we had the landlord's number. He called him and began explaining the situation, and by this point, we hadn't heard a knock at the door for a couple of minutes or so, but I knew what that meant, and I was dreading it when it finally came, a knock at our bedroom window. The blinds were closed, so we couldn't see who it was, and they couldn't see us, but that didn't make me feel much better. Spencer told him someone was stalking the house, and he said he would be right out with a shotgun. We waited for another few minutes, anticipating another knock, but nothing happened until finally our landlord came to the door and announced himself. We asked him if he had seen anyone, and he said no, but that he saw a pickup truck speeding away as he approached the house. I asked if he had gotten a license plate or any other features that could help the police, but he said they were already too far away for him to see anything. Spencer and I grabbed our flashlights and circled the house with him. There were small patches of snow on the ground from a weather system that had come through a few days ago, and in the snow we saw footprints indeed circling the house, and as far as we could tell, there was only one set. We debated calling the police, but we knew that they wouldn't be much help in tracking the guy down. The landlord said to call him again if the guy came back, and with that, we went back into the house, locked everything down, and tried to sleep, but we couldn't. The first thing that came to mind was other missionaries playing a prank on us, but if that was the case, then why didn't they reveal themselves or say gotcha or something like that at some point? Also, it was past curfew, everyone was supposed to be home, and the closest missionaries to us were at least 20 minutes away. The other possibility was that it was some teenagers from the ward playing a prank, but that didn't seem likely either afterwards, because again, they would have come back and started laughing at us, and there was only one set of footprints we found. If it was a prank, I feel like that would have been a group thing to do. After the fact, no one ever fessed up when we did some asking around, so to this day, we still have no idea who was outside or why they chose to harass us. But the scariest thing to me wasn't the knocking or how the only thing separating us from him was a thin layer of glass, but the fact that I likely looked right at this guy when he first knocked on the window in the kitchen and didn't even know it. From that day forward, my sleep only got worse. Nothing worked, and my own personal issues did not improve either. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that house.
Every story you'll hear today started with something ordinary, a knock on the door. But what was behind that door was anything but ordinary.